Hello, if you want to watch exclusive lemon content on What If Naruto, then go to my Boosty. The first link in the description here contains such hot stories for adults, such as What If Naruto was a daddy for Sarada, or Kushina and Mikoto vulgar Naruto mommies. Follow the link and enjoy. I'm waiting for you.
And if you liked it, don't forget to comment that you liked it and what else you would like to see, as well as put your favorite in the comments. A greeting and a hug. The group made no move to indicate that they had seen him, but the ambo hidden in the restaurant certainly did. It was quite easy to notice him since he wasn't disguising himself as he had done previously. In the cockpit, Tsunade and Shizune were listening to the story of how Naruto. He learned how to make the Rasengan. You should have seen his face. His jaw hit the ground so hard it could have made a pothole. Naruto laughed, which made the two women join him. Hirai was already furious. He didn't enjoy being the butt of the joke because of his interactions before with his former teammate when they were kids. He spent so much time rambling that I was able to master the creation of the Rasengan with both hands. The younger blonde cheered. Once again, Hirai was already stunned at Naruto's words. He just needed the time it took him to talk about the injustice of genetics to learn how to make a Rasengan. Jiraiya was about to speak again if it wasn't for a waiter trying to pass by him and pulling him away from the beginning of his possible ramblings. Taking a deep breath, Jiraiya walked towards Tsunade and her table. As soon as he got close enough, he noticed that 4 individuals changed their position slightly as if they were watching him. They must be the Ambu team that is protecting Tsunade and me, the Sannin range thought. By then, Tsunade, Shizune and Naruto realized the Sannin range. Tsunade. She cheerfully cheered as she walked over to her table. How have you been? Tsunade seemed a little annoyed that Jiraiya interrupted more of Naruto's account of his journey. Hi Jiraiya, he said coldly. Jiraiya grimaced at the older blonde's tone. He was worried that she was angry about something. To accept an unnecessary mission. Before he could continue his conversation with Tsunade, Naruto made his presence known with a rather remarkable outburst, as he got up from his seat next to the older blonde. Hey, where were you? He shouted as he aggressively pointed at the white-haired man. I had to fight 2 missing ninjas of that rank because of you, skirt chaser. Tsunade pulled Naruto gently towards the cabin, where she wrapped one of her arms around his shoulder. Jiraiya didn't notice the action as he aggressively closed his eyes before opening them, and screaming with an aggressive but non-violent look in his eyes. Hey, don't shout that, Gaki. Jiraiya took a deep breath before coughing into his hand. Clearing his throat with a clenched fist, Jiraiya sat down next to Shizune. While sitting in the booth, he noticed the red on Tsunade's cheeks, as well as the 2 empty serving bottles on her side of the table, which meant that she had been drinking quite a bit. To that end, he decided to watch his words so that Tsunade would not act aggressively towards him. Jiraiya, Tsunade said to calmly for Jiraiya's health. Would you mind telling me why you didn't heed my takedown notice when my stamp and my office were on the order? He asked. Her hardened gaze was even more terrifying considering she was drunk. Jiraiya squirmed nervously in his seat. In his current state of mind, anything that wasn't better than the truth, and that wasn't contradicted by the young blonde, was the only thing that would save him. Well, you see, Tsunade. I was trying to use my spy network to verify some things. You know, making sure the information you're getting is accurate. Hehe. Tsunade narrowed her eyes and looked at the man. Although the excuse was valid, he did not give any reason to ignore his message. That's only half the explanation, he said. His words no longer carried the hint of alcohol consumption, which meant that he was clearing up, increasing his metabolism. One was all Jiraiya could say. Honestly, I had no excuse for ignoring his message that I couldn't use as an excuse for gullible geniuses. You see, Jiraiya, I don't like those delays or the use of my shinobi for meaningless missions. Although I can't blame you for undertaking a mission, that's more the council's fault, since they approved the mission. At that, Hirai already let out a sigh of relief. However, I can hold you responsible when you choose to ignore your cage's orders when they come directly from them. As he spoke, a dark shadow seemed to envelop the entire restaurant, leaving only him and Tsunade visible. while she seemed to tower over him. Hirai already shuddered with fear because of the woman's anger. As much as he could beat her in a fight, right now her presence was not something that any sane man would challenge. Suddenly, the darkness disappeared and the restaurant returned to normal. He picked up his saga plate and turned the contents over as he spoke. "I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You often need a hard blow to the head to control yourself and make you think more clearly," he said, sipping the contents at the end. Jiraiya had nothing to say against it, as his youth was full of moments when he overdid it at the wrong times. "Hey, you have to admit that my way of thinking also led to several successes when we were on the field," Jiraiya said in his defense. Tsunade seemed a little pensive at his words. "It's true. Your impulsiveness and chutzpah helped us from time to time," he said, nodding. "However, this is one of those moments when your impulsiveness is not appreciated. In war, a soldier's initiative should be encouraged when he succeeds and reprimanded when he fails, but never stopped. This time, however, you are being reprimanded because you effectively wasted a lot of your time, my time, Shizune's time, and Naruto's time. I'll give you credit for teaching Naruto." Here he ruffled the hair of the guy, who smiled, even while playfully trying to stop the woman. "The second most remarkable technique of his father. I was also told that you helped him train his affinity with the futon, so there was some gain from this," Tsunade praised. Hirai was already starting to think he was getting out of the matter until he realized what Tsunade had just said. "Tsunade, you can't say things like that in front of him," Jiraiya proclaimed in a low voice. Tsunade dismissed his concern. "I told him his heritage the moment he started wearing his chains," the Sannin slug said. Jiraiya's jaw hit the table. His teammate told a secret of that rank to a 13-year-old boy. Granted, the kid had a right to know, but they kept it from him for his own good. "So Jiraiya, for your transgression of not heeding the words of your Hokage, you are going to provide assistance in Naruto's ongoing training here," Tsunade said while smiling. Evil smile spread across his features. Shizune held his face in his hand, while Dumbass prayed with compassion for the Sannin range. Hirai already seemed relieved that his punishment seemed so light, although he was curious about Shizune's action and Tsunade's smile. That was until Tsunade spoke again. "You see, I had to postpone teaching Shosenjutsu to Naruto because of this mission. But my good apprentice was reading his textbook while I was on this trip, so he needs hands-on practice." By now, Jiraiya's danger senses were screaming at him that he should run for the hills in walking, and not CUNY. To that end, you'll be his practice dummy and give him feedback as he works. You will also give him demonstrations about the injuries so that he can see them, learn how to heal them, and practice it himself. Now Jiraiya was terrified. Being the corpse of a first-year medical ninja was a horrible fate, and he had just been signed up to be one. Before he could run out, he felt weak, as if his chakra was not responding. He didn't care. He got to his feet to run only to have his left foot bounce against him as if he was trapped, causing him to fall face-first into the middle of the hallway. Then he noticed a small tingling sensation around his ankle. When she turned to see that she had caught him, she noticed a golden chain wrapped around his ankle. That's when he knew that he had been caught, and silently began to moan with eyes, begging him to reconsider his punishment of Tsunade. The older blonde didn't seem to have any indication of changing her mind as she motioned for Naruto to take him to her hotel room. None of the customers said anything as Jiraiya left fingernail prints on the wood of the bar while carrying it to be Naruto's test dummy. It was a warm spring day that felt like it was already summer, although the mood was a little clouded by the dark clouds that seemed to be forming overhead. Naruto was taking a break from his last lesson with Tsunade. To his dismay, he was ordered to relax and smell the trees. He was not even allowed to use his Kajibunzen to continue his studies while walking around the village. However, I had to admit that it was nice to feel the summer breeze at that time, although I could do without the humidity. As he approached the outskirts of the village market, he began to look at the clouds. It wasn't bad, but Naruto preferred a clear sky. Then he would have the warmth of the sun to relax and remember the moment he and Tsunade rested on the field. where he summoned Katsuyu for the first time. He had returned there several times since his return to Konoha, often with Tsunade when they needed to relax for a while. He had to admit that his new vest was a great pillow when he wanted to lie down. Although he would often lend it to Tsunade, who would then tease him for being a chivalrous little swirl, which made him blush. He had been promoted a few days after his return. Unfortunately, he was the only one to be promoted, but Sasuke and Shino were close. It had barely been a few days after he returned from his nearly 2-week mission, when the teams that had members who made it to the final round of the Chunin selection exams were called to Tsunade's office to announce any promotions. Each of the genin stood in front of their Honen sensei, while all of them were standing before Tsunade. Lee was once again in his green spandex with orange leg warmers. Neji had both hands wrapped like Lee, while Tenten seemed to add another tool bag to his belt. Everyone was surprised to see the mask that Naruto had on the side of his head. Why a kitsune? Sakura thought. The Honen who were not on the mission were surprised that the boy had chosen such a creature, considering not only his relationship with her, but also how Konoha felt about such creatures. Kakashi, in turn, also felt proud and was tempted to wipe an imaginary tear from his eye. One of his students was going to wear a mask like his sensei's, even if the mask looked nothing like his. While they were standing, Tsunade sat at her desk, her fingers clasped in front of her mouth, while Shizune stood behind her with a clipboard in her hand, while Dumbass seemed to be guarding the door. Tsunade began to address everyone in front of her. Thank you all for coming. First of all, I would like to congratulate each and every one of you for coming so far in your first Chunin exams. At those words, many puffed their chests with pride, even those who were eliminated in the preliminaries, while another quietly promised himself to go all the way next time. Secondly, I would like to announce those who got a promotion to Chunin. At those words, all the genin stiffened as they waited for them to be the ones to be promoted. Tsunade looked around at everyone in front of her until her gaze fell on Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, take a step forward. Naruto suppressed his growing smile and obeyed. From your skills and tactics demonstrated throughout the exams, it has been decided that you are here for being promoted to the rank of Chunin, he said while smiling at his second apprentice. Naruto let out a cry of happiness as some in the crowd applauded his success. Shizune walked forward and presented his clipboard to Naruto. Held by the clasp was a form waiting for his signature that said he had been promoted and that his signature acknowledged the promotion. There was also a stamp at the bottom of the page, which once he signed the paper, invoked a Chunin vest that Naruto enthusiastically put on while smiling happily. The mood broke when Kiba shouted, only to be reprimanded by his sensei, and then, what? How did he get promoted? Naruto took his place back in line as Tsunade turned her attention back to him. He demonstrated tactical thinking, the development of a new skill beyond the basic 3 of the academy, and the ability to finish fights quickly and efficiently, as well as moderation, to be able to capture targets if necessary during the tournament. I understand that during the preliminaries, his combat performance was unsatisfactory, however. The preliminaries were used as a supplement to reduce the number of participants, and not as a real phase of the examination. It still allows all the judges to see a genin's skill, however. It can only be used as another note, and not as a deciding factor for promotion due to its rarity, Tsunade explained. Shikamaru took the floor because he had a question. If part of the criterion is to be able to capture or objectives, my squad and I can already do it, shouldn't we be promoted as well? While it's true that the 3 of you can do this, you need to work together and lack the skills to do it on your own, she explained. This gave them, at least, Shikamaru already adds something to think about. In addition, the second phase of the exam is being overlooked for all participants, since we only know who reached the tower, and not what they did to gather their second scroll. This is a major oversight on the part of the procurator of the second examination. Because of this, we cannot assess your skills in that section of the exam. And although his academic score for the first exam was not excellent for the first part, Almost everyone in this room was eliminated, since all his methods were quite obvious to the examiners. The main reason they didn't get kicked out of the exam was because it was one time they got caught, and the third. To that end, their sensei will teach them other methods to use to gather information, or teach them methods to hide their attempts. He said with a withering look. The Honin, especially Kakashi, were adjusting their necks because of his heated gaze or trying to distract, to get rid of the woman's anger. Their genin also looked at them with looks of betrayal or anger for having survived the exam only on a whim. Naruto, on the other hand, got excited. That means you'll give me some super cool methods, Suchan. Tsunade nodded with a smile on her face. Yes, I will. Before Naruto could cheer up, Tsunade interrupted him. However, you'd better tell me what Kakashi has already reviewed with you every time we meet, so that we don't waste time reviewing the same thing unless it's to review, do you understand? Naruto quickly nodded, with a look of terror on his face, at his too sweet smile. The young man and his team knew about his learning with the Okage, but the other genin in the room did not. Needless to say, they were surprised. Wait a minute! Wait a minute! Tenten shouted, getting everyone's attention. Naruto, how do you know Tsunade Dono? Naruto smiled beaming as he remembered how they met. She's the one who trained me for the final, he said, dropping the bombshell. What? Many of the newbies shouted in unison. Yes. After Kakashi-sensei said he couldn't train me, he handed me over to this undercover pervert, Ebisu, who took me to the hot springs to learn how to walk on water. The Honin tried to give Kakashi a hard look, but they had no arguments to stand on, as only one of their students had made it to the third round, and they had not supervised his training. Or they had lost easily despite their training. Well, I had problems with that because Levitim put a seal on me that caused my chakra control to get out of control. During the second exam, Kiva interrupted Naruto at that statement. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that you beat me when you couldn't even control your chakra? Shouted the Inuzuka. Naruto wanted to brag about how badass he is, but a look-firm Tsunade quickly stopped him, so he just nodded enthusiastically, making Kiba hang his head in shame. Well, anyway, Naruto continued. This white-haired man was spying in the hot springs, laughing like an idiot, so the undercover pervert tried to stop him. But the white-haired man summoned a toad and knocked out the undercover pervert. The Honin immediately realized who Naruto was referring to, while only a few of the genin had figured him out, namely Tenten, Sakura, and Shikamaru. All they needed was the clue to the white hair and for them to summon a toad. Since she was Tsunade's biggest fan, she knew everything public about the woman, while Shikamaru and Sakura only remembered the information that their mother forced them to study, or they read at the academy to show off. Shino and Sasuke had theorized who it might refer to, but they weren't entirely sure, at least until Tenten shouted the answer. Do you mean Hirai Yasama? Tenten shouted. Naruto nodded dejectedly at his question. Yes, the perverted sage, Naruto said as he crossed his arms over his chest. Well, after he showed up with a silly dance, and like the guy who writes the Kakashi-sensei books. Here the man in question got a disgusted look from Sasuke, and a murderous look from Sakura, which made him squirm. Uncomfortable instead, I stepped into the world, in a screaming argument about him being a pervert. Well, our screams attracted Suchan, who came out of the hot springs and hit him on the horizon. At that moment, Naruto was speechless. I mean, it literally hit him so hard that he flew so far that I couldn't even see him. He flew so far away. Tsunade seemed a little embarrassed by her little outburst the first time she saw Naruto. I had only beaten him up because he was being his usual perverted self. I wasn't expecting to pick up another apprentice that day. Despite his shame, he wouldn't change what he did for the world. Tenten too seemed downright jealous. She had been Tsunade's biggest fan for a long time, and the fact that she missed the opportunity to meet the woman made her feel envious of the Chunin hour. Heck, he even got to witness his super strength stroke in action, something he would gladly trade his left arm for. Naruto smiled happily. After watching her do that, I asked her to train me and well, you know the rest, she explained, without losing her smile. Tsunade, determined to have some fun, spoke up. Oh, aren't you going to tell them that the shock wave from my punch made you fall on your face? she asked with a giggle behind her hand. Naruto looked at the older blonde while she was crying. Suchin. The newbies were speechless by what they had just heard. So the one who trained you to be a doctor was the god aim, aboard Shikamaru stated, his words confirmed by Tsunade and Shizun's nods, along with Naruto's enthusiastic nod. The reactions to that statement from the genin who knew nothing were very varied. Even more so because they could not believe that Naruto was being trained by a Sannin, and as a doctor no less. Hino's eyes rolled over as he overflowed. Mayaba, falling backwards. However, before she hit the ground, she was caught by her larger-than-average teammate. And no. Chuji shouted dramatically, only to be met with several expressionless looks from everyone. While Shikamaru held his face in his hand at his best friend's actions. Neji was speechless, also realizing the danger he was in from the punch Naruto was about to give him. The one he wasn't worried about. Given his trainer, the punch Naruto was going to give him could have killed him, prompting the eldest of the Yuga to swallow. He silently salivates at the thought and curses his arrogance for his near death. Tenten was jealous, to the point that she was grinding her teeth, while the rage against the spiky-haired blonde could be clearly seen in her eyes. He had aspired to be like Tsunade Senhu since he was in the academy. She had tried to follow the woman's path as a doctor, only to meet with failure. Now, here was someone who had few academic skills, getting the opportunity he was looking for. Tenten needed to take several deep breaths to calm down. Well, at least there's still the red-haired angel who can train me, if I can find her, the girl with the bun hair thought. La, for his part, was excited about the promotion of the blonde dressed in orange. Gui-sensei, the short-haired young man said, I'm going to train harder so I can prove that I'm worthy of a promotion too. Gui knelt down to be at the eye level of his student. Gui raised his thumb and replied, Never lose that enthusiasm, Lee, and your youth will always shine. Lee raised his thumb in response and smiled with sparkling teeth. Sasuke was intrigued by the path Naruto had chosen. While being a doctor wasn't something he would have expected from his blonde-haired teammate, it gave him something to think about when it came to his own choices. Yes, Naruto was going to be the support of the team, and also one of the frontline fighters of the team. I had something to think about. Unfortunately, his thoughts were plagued by almost unnoticed whispers of the seal on his neck. That promotion should have been yours. You're weak. Only my power can propel you forward, my dear Sasuke. Fortunately, Sasuke only noticed the thoughts as a kind of distracting annoyance, although he did not know what it was. Since the secondary seal suppressed the temptations of the cursed seal, Sakura was now curious about Naruto. From what was just discussed, Naruto can be very studious. If that's true, then maybe there was someone else on the team with whom I could talk about books. The mere thought made the girl giggle like a pervert, confusing everyone in the room, while a white-haired man near the hot springs laughed uncontrollably, catching the attention of the female customers who seemed. You really are killers. Once she had left her teammate on the couch in the office, Chojino thought a lot about what she was told, and instead started eating a bag of chips. I had been putting off eating anything since the meeting started, and I couldn't stop, damn the consequences. Shikamaru, for his part, thought Naruto was even more problematic now. Since Academy, Naruto was always a troublemaker of some kind. His rambunctious energy is part of what led Shikamaru to break off their friendship. Now, the blonde he dismissed as a nuisance, and someone he disliked the closer she got to him. He was getting stronger as he calmed down. Besides that, he probably had the strength of the Okage in his punches. Better not to get on his bad side, Nara's heir thought. Shino, for his part, didn't say anything about the news he had just heard. Personally, he was neutral with the blonde Uzumaki, and had seen the work he did as a doctor, and had managed to get many of his clan members to survive thanks to the doctors and nurses being available to help in more serious cases. Kiva was still in a bad mood from the fact that he had lost to a weakened Naruto. Despite how hard he tried, Akamaru couldn't get Kiba out of his mood. And Nada was undecided about how to feel. On the one hand, She was happy that her crush was being trained by someone of such renown, but on the other hand, she was a little jealous about the affectionate nickname Naruto had given her. Something Dame. Unfortunately, despite her hidden feelings, she was still reluctant to talk to Naruto. Even now, he couldn't express his congratulations unlike his team. Well, Sakura was congratulating him. Sasuke gave an approving smile, while his sensei seemed to be smiling. Tsunade felt that she had given enough time for everyone to get over their surprise and congratulations. Coughing into her hand, she drew the room's attention to her. As I was saying, Sasuke, Shino, he said, which caused the two in question to straighten their posture a bit. According to the after-action reports you submitted and told the squad that met with you, you two performed admirably in defeating the other two Suna brothers, he praised. Sasuke straightened his posture even more, as this is one of the few times that someone praised him. With honest sincerity, and not just because he is an Uchiha. I congratulate you both for defeating your opponent when you helped in the pursuit and capture of Gaara. While they are strong, they lack the ability to finish a fight quickly or lack a secondary skill respectively. If they fill those gaps in their skills, I'm sure they'll reach Chunin rank in no time. As for the rest of you, don't be discouraged. With time comes skills and experience. Develop your skills, expand your knowledge, and continue to train hard, and you will also be promoted. The others nodded gratefully at the Hokage's words, while Asuke had something to read and practice. If he wanted to find his secondary field of study to develop his skills. While some would think that Sasuke would complain and demand that the legendary doctor teach him, medicine was not a field that attracted him. He preferred to study something that he found interesting or that could help him in a more combative environment. With that, Tsunade allowed everyone to leave if they wished. Team 7 decided to stay while Naruto started proclaiming that they needed to celebrate. Hey guys! Since I got promoted, why don't we go out and celebrate? Naruto asked enthusiastically. Kakashi, remembering some happy moments from his past, said, "That's a great idea, Naruto. It's not every day a promoted squad mate, so count me in," he said with a smile in his eyes. Sakura also liked the idea. Despite being a team for a few months, they rarely did anything as a team. And she said that she was going to try to be friendlier with Naruto the day they were announced as a team. Sasuke didn't say anything, but he didn't leave either, which in his language meant he was on board. With that confirmation, Naruto gave a smile that broke his face as he ran towards the door, only to be stopped by Tsunade. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck shyly. "I'm sorry, Tsuchan. Would you and Shizune-sensei like to come?" He was greeted with an indignant growl. "You can come too, dumbass." Tsunade gave a confident smile. "Of course, we are going to. After all, we are also celebrating our student's promotion," Tsunade said while maintaining her confident smile. As she got up from her desk, remembering how the Sandaime had often complained about the paperwork he would get when he returned to the office, Kakashi felt the need to bring it up. "Excuse me, Hokage Dono, but what about your job?" Tsunade raises an eyebrow before pointing to the two additional desks in her office. Kakashi looked at them, and then looked at the Godame again, without understanding the point. When he looked at Tsunade again, he saw two Kajibunsen, who looked dejected, as they made their way to the desks Tsunade had pointed out. They took piles of papers with them, which made Kakashi laugh nervously since he never thought of using them for such a purpose. Naruto applauded that they were able to leave. When they left the office, he almost shouted, "We should go to Ishiraku so we can celebrate with Toiki and Ayami." Knowing how close he was with the duo from the ramen shop, Tsunade didn't disagree with his choice. Instead, she put a hand on his back, encouraging him to keep going. Sakura protested her choice, although it wasn't because she was mean, she just didn't understand Naruto's connection to the place. "Naruto, are you sure you want ramen for one celebration like this? I mean, you go there quite a lot, so you wouldn't want to go somewhere else for such an occasion." Naruto looked hurt as he comically stiffened up and fell backwards onto Tsunade, who stopped his act by hitting him on the head, causing him to scream in pain as he rubbed the spot that she hit. "Ouch." Suchin. Tsunade smiled as she spoke. Oh, don't give me that. You can pass out here if you want, but that would mean we won't have any ramen. Faced with that, Naruto immediately cut his act short, his desire for the goodness of the noodles outweighing Sakura's sacrilege. While the two blondes were having their moment, Kakashi spoke to Sakura. Sakura, it's the celebration of Naruto. If he wants to eat there, that's his choice. Sakura felt a little bad. I know, sensei. I just wanted Naruto to know that there are other places he can choose. Kakashi smiled at his student's thoughtfulness. He patted her on the head as he spoke. It's nice of you to do so, Sakura, but for Naruto, good company means more than a good meal. Sakura nodded her head in understanding as the group continued on. As everyone was in their own conversation, Sasuke was contemplating his choice of secondary major, leaning heavily towards the same major as Kakashi. Naruto came back to reality as he approached the top of a large hill from which the village market surrounding the Okage Tower could be seen. Looking at the sky, he noticed that some rather dark clouds had appeared covering the sky and blocking the sun, giving the impression that it was going to rain soon. At the top of the hill, there was a brown-haired girl in a pink kimono sitting on a stool with a canvas on an easel. When he got closer, he saw that it was a painting of the Okage Tower, with the dark clouds above like the ones in the sky at that moment. Hey, that's a cool painting, the blonde said as she approached. The girl stiffened at his words, surprised as she was not expecting anyone. Without turning to look at the blonde, he replied, "Thank you." He immediately returned to his painting. Soon he added little bits of light at the bottom of the clouds. This was soon accompanied by a thunderclap that caught the blonde's attention. The girl put down her current brush and grabbed a bigger one. Then he grabbed a tube of blue-tinted white paint. He put some paint on his palette before rolling his brush on the painting. He soon put his brush on the canvas before painting what looked like a lightning bolt on the canvas that hit the tower. Or cage, surprising Naruto. He couldn't ask about his choice of addition because as soon as he finished, a huge lightning bolt came from the sky and almost hit the building, only to split in half, surprising the two. As soon as the lighting was reduced by half, the girl seemed to panic and started grabbing her things, only to be stopped by Naruto. I didn't understand her panic, but I could tell that there was a correlation between the girl painting a lightning bolt that hit the tower and the lightning bolt that almost hit the tower. Naruto initially tackled the girl, only for the collision to trigger a Kawarimi no Jutsu. Acting quickly, Naruto put his mask on and concentrated. He entered his sensory ability, detecting someone who appeared to be a girl running away from him and the tower. Thinking that was his goal, Naruto summoned some Kajabunsen, one of whom went to the tower to check on Tsunade and report his findings. He and the rest set off after the fleeing chakra. At the tower, Tsunade was having a meeting with Kakashi to better use Naruto in team formations. After all, despite having a doctor on his team when he was younger, his colleague, Rin, didn't have the same medical and combat training as Tsunade and her trainees. Originally, the two decided to have their meeting outdoors, as the weather was too perfect to be indoors. Unlike what was known, Kakashi arrived on time, fulfilling his promise to improve himself and his team. "Did you want to see me, Kakashi?" Tsunade asked him. Kakashi nodded briefly. "Yes, Okage Dono. I wanted to ask what was the best way to design formations with Naruto's abilities. I had a doctor in my team a long time ago, and even however, they didn't have the same amount of skill as a fighter. I'm sure Naruto will make it under your tutelage," Kakashi said. Tsunade understood her difficult situation. It was not common for a doctor to also be a skilled frontline fighter. As they focused on healing and being the first target to be eliminated by enemy combatants. However, with his training and Naruto already knowing the Vyakugo and no Sozo Seizei, he was definitely more confident than any other doctor other than Shizune or herself. Tsunade nodded and began lecturing Kakashi about Naruto's role and his placement in such formations. In the course of their discussion, the clouds started rolling, darkening the sky. As the discussion progressed, Kakashi was able to say that he really wished he had brought a notebook. Shamefully, Kakashi had to stop his Okage. "A pardon to my Okage Dono, But do you think I could get a notebook back, so I could study this after our meeting? He said as he rubbed his head, his brain completely turned on with so much information there was to comprehend. Tsunade let out a sigh. Tsunade touched a seal inside her aori. With a puff of smoke, Tsunade held a large 3-ring binder with the lid that said Combat Medic. Formations and Applications by Tsunade Senhu. The folder was a copy of the original document the blonde had drafted when she first proposed adding a medic to each squad. In the Second Shinobi War, while the original was at the Senhu complex. He thought that this conversation would come up sooner or later, so he sealed one in one of the storage seals inside his aori, so that he could give it to Kakashi whenever he wanted to talk. Kakashi still looked embarrassed, but he was grateful for the material he could study, although from Tsunade's irritated look. He knew that she would continue to go over the basics of each of her formations with him. That was until they heard a crash. Looking up, everyone was surprised to see the dark clouds that invaded the open sky. Soon they saw flashes appear among the clouds. Due to the sudden change in the weather, the shinobi became suspicious. Even though there were no records of a jutsu that could manipulate the weather. Suddenly, a huge bolt of lightning shot towards the tower. The shinobi acted quickly. Kakashi sent a huge amount of chakra to his right hand while stretching the limb to turn it into a knife-shaped hand. Kakashi jumped up to receive the incoming lightning. The Zambus performed as well. In an impressive display of shuriken jutsu, the Zambu wove a Faraday cage around themselves and the O-cage, before erecting an earthen dome around the cage to protect the O-cage from any possible delay. Devastation. Fortunately, there was no devastation, as, with the help of his second original jutsu, Kakashi cut the lightning in half. The two halves impacted around the tower, shaking the structure and causing the shinobi to close the village. While the Honen began to lead the Chunin and Gen. While the Zambu were rushing to the location of their Okage to check the condition of their cage, receive orders, and start their investigation. At the training camps, Guri was working with his team until their sensei stopped them due to the arrival of lightning. All right team, that's enough. We'll stop here for now so they can get home. After all, we have to be in top shape to be able to enjoy the spring of our. Gui was suddenly interrupted when Neji screamed in a panicked tone. Gui-sensei. The tower was almost hit by lightning, but the lightning was cut off. That last part caught the attention of the energetic sensei. There was no way a natural lightning bolt would have hit the tower when it was so close to Okage Mountain. That meant the lightning was the cover for an attack on the Okage. Gui changed to his more serious side and began to give orders. Listen up. The village is closed now, he shouted, causing Sugenin to open his eyes like plates. We just had an attack, so we'll keep no one from leaving. Tenten chose this moment to protest. But Gui-sensei, what about Tsunade Dono? Gui turned his attention to his student. That's not our duty. Our duty is to prevent anyone from leaving the village. With that, Gui turned his attention to Neji. Neji, activate your Yakugan and tell me if you see anyone coming out here. Neji nodded and did as he was ordered. To his surprise, Neji saw copies of Naruto chasing a single individual, and everyone was moving away from the center of the village. But Naruto seemed to be chasing someone. At that moment, he told his sensei what he had seen. Gui started thinking about his team's next action. After a short time, he informed his team of his decision. Okay, we'll help Naruto and capture his target and interrogate him to find out his intentions. Neji and Lee dutifully felt, while Tenten hesitated because he wanted to see how his idol was doing. Finally, he nodded and allowed Gui to order Neji to lead them towards the running individuals. Naruto was chasing the girl he was chasing with his Bunsens getting closer to surround her. That was until she dropped a picture. As soon as the paper fell to the ground, Kakashi appeared standing before the stunned Naruto. He stood lazily with his hands in his pockets. Kakashi-sensei. A confused Naruto asked him. Kakashi gave the boy a smile with his eyes before disappearing. Naruto felt cold steel in his throat. Suddenly, the feeling disappeared, and it became difficult for him to breathe. One of his Bunzen who witnessed the act dissipated to let the original know what had happened. Naruto staggered forward as his hands were around his throat. Blood was flowing to his lungs as he fell to his knees. With the memories of the Bunsen, he learned that his sensei had cut his throat. Before he could get caught up in the question why, a voice sounded in his distracted mind. Don't focus on the why. Release your Yakugo. And no cure your throat. Recognizing the voice, he quickly put his hands on the tiger seal and released the seal on his forehead and activated the Sozo Seizei, sealing the wound in his throat. Once the wound healed and the release marks receded, Naruto started coughing up the blood that was running down his throat. Kakashi, believing that the guy was taking his last moments, patiently waited for the blonde to expire. Instead, he found himself with 6 chains that were coming from the boy's back trying to get through. Kakashi acted quickly and rushed back to give himself more room to dodge, only for several more sets of chains to appear. Suddenly, Naruto received the memories of 2 of his Bunsen who continued the chase. They were dissipated by Niguri, who was now running towards their location. Naruto wasted no time and created several more Bunsen. When the smoke cleared, Naruto created several hundred, hoping the numbers would help him last. Before summoning one of the slugs to help him, the Bunsen dispersed to reinforce those attacking Kakashi or prepare for the incoming Honen. The group that was fighting Kakashi began to quickly fall to the various Katen jutsu that the silver-haired Honen was using to corner the Bunsen, forcing those who were waiting for the incoming Migui to help in the attack against Kakashi. What was surprising the masked blonde was the fact that his sensei was doing his best to use his jutsu, instead of being conservative and patient like he had been against Team 7. The masked Honen was simply throwing ninjutsu from left to right and to the center, burning the landscape with controlled fires. It was working as the Bunsen were dying when they could not defend themselves with their chains or be defended by another. Despite the sheer volume of chains being thrown, the fire and smoke obscured the Naruto's visual abilities, forcing them to rely on their sensory abilities. Unfortunately, that was a challenge in itself, as they saw a very messy blue sea. It was difficult to distinguish Kakashi when the man was not jumping, as he was hidden by his bunses. This just highlighted something else I needed. Work? Unfortunately, most of the Bunsen had died soon after. A side effect of creating so many Bunsen was that wide area jutsus could catch many of them with a single use. By then, Naruto was already alone. His clothes were burned as he gasped from having to dodge all the fire jutsus that had been thrown. Unfortunately, as soon as the last Bunsen had been released, Naruto got kicked in the face by a blur. And the only thing that saved his skull was his mask, which was reinforced by Tsunade. The blonde fell down the burned field and only stopped thanks to friction. He raised his head and saw that Ui had arrived and was now standing next to Kakashi, with both Honen staring at the fatigued blonde. However, his vision was soon obscured by a large explosion of fire that seemed to fall on the Honen, but the one who shot it landed hard on the ground behind Naruto. Very soon, Naruto felt a foot on his back. The blow forced him to lean back and scream in pain. Fortunately, he did not feel pain for a long time, as the weight on his back disappeared as if it had never been there. However, Kakashi soon appeared in front of him, apparently landing after having jumped into the air. Soon he heard people shouting his name before someone started to bring him to his knees. Soon Mirui stood in front of him in a combat-ready posture, staring at Kakashi. The Kakashi in front of him simply settled into lazy posture with his hands in his pockets. Gui noticed that the Kakashi in front of him was missing the chakra saber on his lower back, as well as the second tool bag. Naruto couldn't see him, but Gui squinted at the Kakashi in front of him. Just as I thought. This Kakashi is also an imposter like mine, thought the honeycut with the bowl. Behind him, his squad was helping Naruto and Sasuke, who were heading back to the city center, after a training outside the Uchiha complex to keep their minds clear. The black-haired young man had heard explosions nearby. Since I was no longer near the training ground, I was curious to know what was going on. When he arrived, he saw Naruto getting hit in the face by Lee's Team Honey. By the looks of it, That wasn't part of the training. I was more sure of this when Naruto struggled to look at the Honin. None of the Honin made a move to stop what was happening. Instead, he left his teammate on the ground and struggled to lift his head. Seeing two Honin attacking his teammate, Sasuke tried to intervene using the Katen Gakaki one jutsu to at least obscure the Honey's view, not to hurt him. Unfortunately, for the last Uchiha, the Honey moved just before the fireball hit it. Kakashi had appeared behind the last Uchiha, ready to kill him by pushing a kunai towards his heart. Sasuke jumped out of hiding to escape, only to run into a kunai and pinned on his back. Sasuke screamed in pain and grabbed just above where the kunai was, and only to be knocked to the ground by a fist to the top of his head. Kakashi was ready to deal the killing blow, creating his second Ju. Original, until a burst of cradle and came from his right, forcing him to fall on one knee, but he was further off course. When a palm strike collided with his arm that was armed with his attack, which surprised the attacker. When he turned into fog, while an upward kick almost took off his head. To avoid this, Kakashi jumped over the newcomers to land before the place where Sasuke's fireball had landed. With his arm already reformed, Team 9's Yuga, Neji, was keeping an eye on Sasuke, while Team 9's shooter, Tenten, was keeping an eye on Naruto. His position also allowed him to back up his sensei in case he needed it. The girl helped bring Naruto to his knees before turning their attention to the enemy in front of them. Neji wasn't sure what he was looking at when he focused his Yakugan on the Kakashi in front of his team. The man looked solid based on how the chakra was flowing, which meant they were real, but there were also wisps of mist coming out of the man. Similar to what he would see if his surroundings were affected by a genjutsu. The only thing that confirmed to him that the Kakashi in front of him was not real was that there was no tank. There was no way to hide them from a strong enough Byakugan, at least that's what was always said about his family's eyes. So whatever he was seeing wasn't an Eng, at least. It couldn't have been an elemental Bunsen either, since they can't cast ninjutsu that isn't from the same element that creates them, and they are not Kagebun, since when he looked at them when Naruto used them to fight Kiba. They had their own tenketsu along their chakra paths, leaving him baffled. It wasn't long after that, Tsunade, his Ambu team, and several other squads, along with Kakashi arrived on the scene. Tsunade was surprised to see another Kakashi, but became worried when she saw Naruto kneeling on the ground, while appearing to be breathing hard. The Zanbu were as shocked as Tsunade, while Kakashi read that two of his students were injured. Needless to say, this was not what they expected to see when a Naruto Bunsen arrived at the Okage Tower. Saying that a girl with brown hair had painted the weather and a lightning strike hit the Okage Tower before it actually happened. After I told them where this had happened, they had asked where this had happened. Kakashi and Tsunade panicked when the Bunsen reported that Naruto was fighting Kakashi of all people. The group set off immediately with Naruto's Bunsen guiding them. Tsunade ordered, "Gui, explain to me what happened." Without taking his eyes off Kakashi, Gui gave his report. "Yes, ma'am. My team was training until the clouds came. Thinking it was going to rain, I finished the training. When Neji talked about a lightning strike that almost hit the tower, I had my team start the blocking procedures. When Neji checked the surrounding area with his Yakugan, he alerted me to Naruto's pursuit. We immediately moved to help in the pursuit of whoever Naruto was chasing. When we arrived, Naruto-san was being trampled by a copy of me, while Sasuke-san was almost killed by Kakashi. We acted quickly to save Naruto-san and Sasuke-san. When I hit the copy of myself, it disappeared into the fog. My students managed to get Kakashi's copy to retreat to its current position. Naruto stepped in and gave his opinion. This, Kakashi-sensei, came out of a photo. I think it's a jutsu of some kind, the injured Chunin gasped. Tsunade went over the information she had been given before giving her orders. From what Gui and Naruto said, they wouldn't be able to capture this person alive if they are the same. With this in mind, he gave his orders. Tear down this copy and take Naruto and Sasuke to the hospital. Once this is over and his condition is taken care of, I want a full report from everyone involved on what happened, as well as status updates on our walls. The surrounding force gave a shout of affirmation before moving. Naruto was picked up by one of the Zambu before being taken to the hospital. For Sasuke, his shoulder was wrapped, as the Ambu felt it was better to keep the kunai so that it could be studied, to determine which jutsu was used to make it. With anger as his motivator, Kakashi approached his rival, revealing his Sharingan and pulling out his saber chakra. What he saw with his Sharingan intrigued him to be, figuring to write down every detail that his eye perceived and include it in his report. Moving quickly, Kakashi pounced on his doppelganger, Gui, not far behind. Despite the fact that the enemy in front of them was Kakashi, the fake Kapinan never activated a Sharingan, and with the duo facing him, it was fast. Quickly killed by the two powerful Honin after the first Katen jutsu was thrown at them. The fight, if you can call it that, was pretty short. Gui got ahead of Kakas and started with a direct punch that was blocked by the fake. Kakashi took advantage of this immediately by coming firm behind his old friend and thrust his sword forward to skewer his enemy. The fake tried to push Gui, but the young man from the bowl cut wanted nothing to do with it and grabbed both of his enemy's wrists, while putting himself on guard to have more influence. Kakashi's sword struck accurately and pierced through the fake's bulletproof vest to his heart. What surprised everyone except Gui, as he had seen the effect before, was that the fake Kakashi vanished into the mist around the sword that pierced his heart. Everyone was stunned, as the only time something would vanish into the fog like that was when a genjutsu would dissipate. Unbeknownst to Tsunade and those around her, when the fake Kakashi dissipated, the kunai she had stuck on Sasuke's shoulder also vanished into the mist. Returning to paying attention, Tsunade delivered her next set of orders. I want to know what jutsu that was. Any jutsu that can be used to create copies of our own staff is a big security risk, he ordered with steel in his voice. Gui, Tsunade called. The aforementioned Honin stood firm. I want your team to meet me at the hospital. I'll bring the reports to you and your team, as well as Naruto and Sasuke. The Gadaimi soon turned to Kakashi. I want to know what you saw with your Sharingan. Meet me there as soon as you can. Kakashi nodded at his leader's orders. When they were dismissed, Kakashi headed to the hospital immediately, hoping to meet Sakura on the way so he could check on his teammates. Gui turned to his team and gave his own orders. Very well, he shouted with his usual exuberance. We will be meeting with our Okage, so make sure to remember everything you saw and make sure to write down when something is a fact, he said with a good boy pose. Neji and Tenten sighed, while Lee felt animatedly. Yes, we already know, Tenten sighed. Very well. Then let's go, Gui shouted as he and Lee left for the hospital, leaving Neji and Tenten behind. The two were the last to arrive, even though Lee was still considered a recovering shinobi. The two were joking about some crazy challenge as they got closer. Well, Neji came closer. Tenten struggled not to bend from exhaustion. Phew, can you too, no, run that fast? Tenten asked, gasping. Come on, Tenten. We are in the spring of our youth, he proclaimed Gui. We must strive with everything we have and fan the inner flames so that they shine brighter, Gui shouted as he pointed to the sky. He hoped that his speech would invigorate Tenten to make an effort to train harder. Unfortunately, like many before, the speech did nothing to invigorate his student. With a sigh, he led his team to the receptionist, before walking soon to Naruto and Sasuke's room. As Team 9 approached the room that Naruto and Sasuke had been assigned, they heard muffled sounds as if someone was talking. However, the closer they got, the better they could listen. They heard what sounded like someone was worried about someone else before they were suddenly stopped. When they got to the door, they heard someone laughing. Gui recognized the sound immediately, as it was what his friend used to do when reading his book. However, soon they could hear someone talking. It sounded like Naruto. Hey, I was just making sure she was okay, Sakura-chan. Is that so wrong? It is when you're being mean about it, the girl in question replied. They didn't hear a response, so half the group assumed Naruto was pouting. Then they heard a sigh. Yes, Gaki, as I said to your Bunsini right now, I'm fine. The Gadai sounded serious to me. So can you tell me where Team 9 is so I can ask what happened? There was silence before they heard Naruto speak. Yeah, they're outside. With a knock from inside the door, the hidden Ambu opened the door and let in a stunned Team 9. None of them knew about Naruto's sensory abilities. It's okay, Tsunade said, pulling Team 9 out of their state of shock. Would you mind telling me what happened? Then he turned his gaze to the youngest blonde in the room. Naruto, you start. Naruto nodded, and the blonde Chunin began his story. Inside Tenokuni, Orochimaru lay on a medical table with many devices threaded on his body or used to monitor his condition. Standing over him were his left and right hands, Guren and Kabuto. Kabuto was wearing a doctor's robe, while holding a clipboard with many medical notes about his teacher. While Guren had several bandages wrapped around his arms due to the burns he received while fighting the Tsunade's Ambu guard. Kabuto looked worried as he checked the notes on the clipboard, while Guren frowned at his master's best medical officer. Guren was getting impatient while waiting for the news about his master's condition while he had his arms crossed over his chest. Well, he asked the blue-haired woman harshly. Kabuto didn't say anything. He was too engrossed in his work to care about the woman's attitude. When he finished confirming what he wrote, he spoke. It seems that Orochimaru-sama suffered severely from the blows Tsunade had dealt him. His organs were broken, and his bones were almost crushed to dust. If it wasn't for many of the body-strengthening supplements he developed, he would surely be dead. Guren let out a guttural growl. I'll make that bitch get revenge for what she did to Orochimaru-sama, he said as Kabuto rolled his eyes, knowing that that was a task that was far beyond Guren's. Suddenly, Guren's anger turned to him. And what about you? Why don't you help him? She asked him angrily while pointing at him harshly. Kabuto simply turned up his glasses. There's nothing I can do. He suffered too much internal damage with big bruises on every blow. The only thing left for him to do is to change his body. Guren looked surprised. He had no idea how much damage his master had suffered in the last fight. Soon he spoke as he put a hand on his chest. Then I'm ready. Prepare it so that Orochimaru-sama can survive while using me, the loyal Kunoichi said. Before Kabuto could speak, Orochimaru's hoarse voice came from his place on the bed. No, I still need you, the wounded Evasanen said. Bring me one of the marked prisoners, Orochimaru ordered. Guren looked as if she had been stabbed. She was destined to be her master's next body. Now a nobody was being chosen at random. She felt despised and her pride hurt by not being able to fulfill her life's ambition. Guren let out an imperceptible growl from the bottom of his throat as Kabuto left the room to prepare his master's next body. Well, my people, this was it from my side. I hope you will like it as much as I did making it. Leave your like, share and subscribe. A greeting and a hug. Hello beautiful people, how are you feeling today? Here Naruto Nexus reporting with this 14th part of this great theory that I come to present today. I hope you like it and burst it Alex. And if you liked it, don't forget to comment that you liked it and what else you would like to see, as well as put your favorite in the comments. A greeting and a hug. The group made no move to indicate that they had seen him, but the Ambo hidden in the restaurant certainly did. It was quite easy to notice him since he wasn't disguising himself as he had done previously. In the cockpit, Tsunade and Shizune were listening to the story of how Naruto. He learned how to make the Rasengan. You should have seen his face. His jaw hit the ground so hard it could have made a pothole. Naruto laughed, which made the two women join him. Hirai was already furious. He didn't enjoy being the butt of the joke because of his interactions before with his former teammate when they were kids. He spent so much time rambling that I was able to master the creation of the Rasengan with both hands. The younger blonde cheered. Once again, Hirai was already stunned at Naruto's words. He just needed the time it took him to talk about the injustice of genetics to learn how to make a Rasengan. Jiraiya was about to speak again if it wasn't for a waiter trying to pass by him and pulling him away from the beginning of his possible ramblings. Taking a deep breath, Jiraiya walked towards Tsunade and her table. As soon as he got close enough, he noticed that 4 individuals changed their position slightly as if they were watching him. They must be the Ambu team that is protecting Tsunade and me, the Sannin range thought. By then, Tsunade, Shizune and Naruto realized the Sannin range. "Tsunade." She cheerfully cheered as she walked over to her table. "How have you been?" Tsunade seemed a little annoyed that Jiraiya interrupted more of Naruto's account of his journey. "Hi Jiraiya," he said coldly. Jiraiya grimaced at the older blonde's tone. He was worried that she was angry about something. To accept an unnecessary mission. Before he could continue his conversation with Tsunade, Naruto made his presence known with a rather remarkable outburst, as he got up from his seat next to the older blonde. "Hey, where were